Welcome to the Skull King Football Podcast, presented by Vox DFS Firelines. Now, here are your hosts, Justin and Ryan Skullrood.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another Skull King Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullrood and I'm your host tonight. With me, as almost always, as most weeks, is one of my partners in crime, Mr. Greg Talcott. Go ahead and say hi, Greg.
Good evening, everybody in the Twitter and Facebook universe.
We're hoping that everyone can hear us on Twitter since we don't actually have that going right now. I mean, I can see that it's running right now. That's about all I can do. I can't, with the headphones on, I can't tell if the sound is actually going or if the feed is actually continually running. So who knows? Well, if you could tweet us on that just to make sure. So we are live again. We are trying to, as much as possible, go live with all of our podcasts. The one thing about watching this on either Twitter or Facebook is because of the limited capabilities that we have so far and the limited amount of resources that we have in order to pay the big bucks for the big, products that allow us to do multiple things at once. You will be able to see me the entire time. You will, however, not be able to see Greg, but you should be able to hear him on all platforms. So if you can't, make sure to tweet us or mention in the comments, and we'll be good to go. If you have any comments or questions for us throughout the podcast, make sure to throw up the comments on either Facebook or Twitter, and we'll have both those pages up to make sure that we respond to you during the broadcast. All right, quick something that I wanted to mention real quick before we actually got into our news and notes is something I'm really excited about is I found out today which league I am in for the Scott Fish Bowl 7 tournament. For those of you who don't know what the Scott Fish Bowl is, it's a massive fantasy football tournament on that is run by a man named Scott Fish, and it is hosted. It's tons of gurus all over it. In my league alone, I'll be going up against JJ Zacharyson of the late round quarterback and number fire, as well as Jim Bukowski of Fantasy Sharks, Dynasty League Football's Matt Price, CBS Fantasies Jamie Eisenberg, and 4for4 Fantasies Chris Kucharski. So I've got some stiff competition. This will be a whole lot of fun. This will be by far the most competitive league I have ever been in. I want to say that there's over 700 teams in it this year. So really fun format. I will do my best to keep all of you guys up to date and informed on what's going on with that. So why don't we go ahead and get into our news. Start off our news. Our news and notes are brought to you by Bluehost. Bluehost is the #1 recommended web hosting company by WordPress.org. Every account features one-click WordPress installation. They have trained in-house experts available 24/7 and a help center full of guides, video tutorials, and more to help you build your website. They have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Bluehost also gives you over $150 in advertising offers from Bing, Google, and other leading sites to help you grow your business. You sign up today, you can get your own website for as little as $3.95 per month. At Skull King Football here, we are so happy with how smooth the transition has been to using Bluehost, and we hope that you guys would also want to go over to them. If you want to launch your business today, make sure to go to bluehost.com/track/skulking today. That's bluehost.com/track/skulking. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the news and notes. A lot has happened in this last week, Greg. A lot's going on. All right, so to start off, I think it's fitting since we're going over wide receivers. Lots of hype, especially coming out of Miami Dolphins camp. Miami Dolphins, Devontae Parker apparently has been having an absolutely monstrous camp, and people think that he is going to have an amazing season. Now, is it just me, or does it seem like every offseason the Miami Dolphins have everyone breaking out and they're going to win the Super Bowl this year? Is it just me? I mean, we've already had Adam Gase talk about Jay Ajayi getting, about 350 carries this year. And then Devontae Parker's going to be going off. Who else do they have? You've already got Jarvis Landry. Julius Thomas is supposed to have a huge year this year. Really?
Yeah. I think Miami is one of those teams that every preseason there seems to be a fair amount of hype. At least the preponderance of preseasons, there's a fair amount of hype about Miami. At the end of the day, it's impossible for them to win their division. We've already ruled that out, right? Because you have that New England team, right? They're in that division. So you're certainly not beating them, and then you have a bunch of garbage. So can they look better than, say, the Jets? Yes. Can they be equal or marginally better than the Bills? Yes. What does that all translate to? An 8-win season, maybe, best case scenario, they get 9 wins. And so, the guys on Miami from a fantasy perspective are always going to be those spot players, unless it's maybe like Jarvis Landry, just because he's going to get so many catches in a PPR league. But outside of that, nothing really changes with this team. I mean, these are not guys that you want to go marching into battle with and hoping that you're going to win, the Fishbowl, for example.
Well, okay, I do have to say I am somewhat encouraged by Jay Ajayi. The only thing I worry about is, can he actually hold up to the load? Even if he only gets 300 carries, even if it's not 350, if it's close to 300, if he can hold up to that load, I think he'll have a very successful season. Again, can he hold up to that?
Right. I mean, that's a huge question. And maybe he can, but I mean, where you're looking at him being a number one running back, right, for your team, how does he stack up against other potential number ones? I would argue there's multiple rookies I would probably take above him, especially if it's maybe a dynasty league format. But yeah, I get nervous anytime it comes to putting a Miami player on my team.
All right. Moving on. Let's go to Giants running back coach Craig Johnson suggested that Paul Perkins can be a 3-down back. He could be. However, they have this guy named Shane Vereen who's really good at catching the ball out of the backfield. His only downfall is that he can't stay healthy. He could be a first and second down back, but again, that depends on whether or not the Giants O-line can actually block for him.
Right. I mean, I think Perkins is a pickup from what they had, and he's an improvement. And maybe he is going to be able to play, 3 downs here and there. But yeah, you do have Shane Vereen there. He is a specialist when it comes to being a receiving back out of the backfield, and that is still a team at the end of the day that is built around the passing game, right? And adding Brandon Marshall in the offseason is just further evidence of that. So I think that, an improvement for the Giants, not necessarily somebody who's going to start the year high on the fantasy radar, but it certainly might be worth, kind of one of those bench positions in case he does, catch fire and surprise some people.
Yeah, let's not forget they also added, was Evan Ingram? Is that the tight end that they drafted as well? Right,
and big things are expected, from him as well.
Yeah, so I'm not seeing it. I need to see some preseason games and see what he actually looks like, actually running against someone that's not his own teammate. Moving on, new Falcons offensive coordinator Steve Sarkisian wants to utilize Julio Jones more often in the red zone. I have one thing to say. It's about freaking time. Last year he I want to say it was 9 targets in the red zone. The 2 years before he had, was like 12, 13. Why is Julio Jones at 6'4", 220 or whatever it is, whatever his freakish body size is, and the body control that he has, why is he not targeted more in the red zone? It makes absolutely no sense to me.
Well, there's a lot of inexplicable things about the Falcons, as recent history shows, and kind of, if you look at the Falcons historically, there's just some head-scratching moves. So, yeah, not using your best offensive weapon, who's a phenomenal target in the red zone, for a team that's built around its quarterback, doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense to me. Now, years ago, of course, you would have been targeting Tony Gonzalez, but he's not there anymore. So there's really no good reason to not be targeting him.
Yeah. Packers coach Mike McCarthy says he wants to get Randall Cobb more touches. Randall Cobb had a little bit of a down year. Devontae Parker, or not Devontae Parker, Devontae Adams, one of the other many Devontaes in the league, had a phenomenal comeback year after really struggling, trying to take I guess you could say a 1 or even a 2 role with Jordy Nelson gone. He had a lot of the better cornerbacks on him this year. With there really being a 3-headed monster with Randall Cobb, he really took over what was considered the number 2 position from Randall Cobb. Finished with 12 touchdowns, was just under 1,000 yards. Had an absolutely phenomenal season. Do you think that Randall Cobb cuts into that this year? Is there going to be more passing to go around in Green Bay?
I don't think Randall Cobb does. First, Devontae Adams isn't getting 12 touchdowns this year. I don't think that's going to happen. And the simple reason for that is the addition of one Martellus Bennett. Martellus Bennett is a red zone target, a premier red zone target. He's an 8 to 10 touchdown guy, I think, easily in Green Bay. I think the upside on him is better than 10, but I think 8 to 10 is safe. So I think ultimately you wouldn't look for a whole heck of a lot more for Randall Cobb with the addition of Bennett alone.
Yeah. Well, and again, like you said, even if we take away a little bit from Adams, it's not going to, that's not going to be enough with the addition of Bennett. You're probably still taking away a little bit from Randall Cobb in that instance. So. DeMarco Murray's hand was in a cast after undergoing a procedure, but Titans head coach Mike Mularkey said he expects the running back for camp. The Chiefs are throwing everything, quote, throwing everything at third-round running back Kareem Hunt in OTAs. I love hearing that because, it seems like what sucks – I talked to Justin about this. What sucks is it seems like the entire industry is picking him to be this year's Jordan Howard. When I've been trying to call him this year's Jordan Howard the whole time, and now everyone else tries to say it at the same time, it really sucks. You can't be individual anymore because there's so many voices in fantasy football. But like I said, I really like Kareem Hunt, and I really think that he can take over Spencer Ware's position as the lead back in Kansas City.
Yeah, that's definitely a position that was open, this season coming in. They haven't had a go-to guy since Jamal Charles started, experiencing injuries left and right. So I think Hunt is absolutely, as I think we've talked about before, is absolutely in position to be, a top candidate for, a Rookie of the Year.
Yep. All right. New Jersey Advanced Media's Connor Hughes pegged Austin Superion Jenkins as the, quote, most impressive player on the field at Jets OTAs. Yeah, we heard some. A couple years ago in Tampa Bay that he was looking pretty good, and we see how that turned out as well. The Jets' offenses haven't used tight ends in I can't tell you how long. It's maybe that's a question for Gary Vaynerchuk because he's such this huge New Jersey or New York Jets fan. Having seen ASJ at the University of Washington when he played in college, he does suffer from a lack of concentration and drops. He is a physical beast of a man, again, but there's that focus. There's the hands. He tends to have ping pong paddles for hands at times. He may be impressive, but that doesn't mean he's going to produce on the field. I'm not seeing it I'm seeing again the Jets struggling a lot this year, and Austin Superion Jenkins not doing anything to try to hold them up.
Yeah, I just can't stop giggling about the, looks good at Jets camp. I mean, that's a pretty low bar for everybody to try to get over there. Again, Austin Superion Jenkins is not a guy who should end up being drafted, I don't think, in most leagues. Using a tight end, and he's certainly not going to be a week in, week out starter now. Maybe he's somebody who can pleasantly surprise and ends up being a waiver wire pickup, but that's the best it's going to be. Let's be realistic. This is the Jets that we're talking about.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Mike K of First Coast News thinks that TJ Yeldon could be a surprise cut from the Jaguars. I could possibly see this. What that would mean to me is that the Jags actually believe that Fournette can be a 3-down player. Because Chris Ivory is not necessarily a 3-down player. He's more of that first and second down banger. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, but that's definitely not what he's best at. TJ Yeldon, I believe, is the better pass catcher out of that group. But again, he can't run the ball on short runs. I mean, he proved multiple times that he couldn't get the ball in from the 1-yard line. So I can kind of, again, I would be surprised at it, but at the same time, I can kind of see it.
Well, right, and I think part of this, too, is not every team uses that, that third down back. Maybe it's Fournette's blocking ability, given his size on third down, which allows him to play 3 downs and not necessarily an expectation that he's going to catch a lot of passes. I mean, I'd be surprised if he caught more than 35 passes in a season. True. I think that would be high, right? I mean, if he's getting on average, just shy of 3 catches a week. Yeah. So I don't think he's necessarily going to haul in a lot, but I think because of his size, he makes more protection for Bortles. And obviously, part of this pick is the investment they have in Bortles. It's all about supporting Blake Bortles, because if not, you're going back to the drawing board at quarterback. That's a huge setback for a team that thought, at least a couple of years ago, they were on the rise, maybe turning the corner.
Yeah, well, if you also look at how much they've invested in the wide receiver core, when you've got Allen Robinson, Allen Hurns, Marquise Lee, who had a pretty good season last year, and then they went on to draft D.D. Westbrook as well. They've got a great wide receiver core, so I don't think they necessarily need. Going back to TJ Yeldon, they may not necessarily need the running back to catch the ball out of the backfield with all the other weapons that they have. So, Eddie Lacy, feast mode, met his weight requirements, coming in under 250 pounds. So he got his second, was it $55,000 bonus or whatever it was. Working on P90X again. Well, it worked at the beginning last year too. It's just once the season started, the waistline expanded again.
Right. So that'll be the test to see what happens with Eddie Lacy this year. I mean, he's in a system that should theoretically work well for his skill set and size, as evident, by Marshawn Lynch in the past. But I still think, the most upside opportunity in the backfield is CJ Prosise.
In terms of upside, most likely, yeah. Again, if Eddie Lacy can even have somewhat close to how he started out last season. Last year he was at, I want to say 5 to 5.1 yards per carry. It was just, I think that the weight didn't help him with his ankles, because I want to say it was an ankle injury that caused him to go on the IR last year. So if he can keep a little bit of the weight off, keep those knees and ankles healthy, who knows, he could have a very, very good season this year. So, which the Seahawks need a good season out of a running back.
That's for sure. Yeah.
All right. Wide receiver Jeremy Maclin signed with the Ravens, a 2-year deal. I want to say it was for about $11 million. How do you think that this affects Wallace and Perryman? Well, let's not even. Who cares about Perryman? How do you think this affects Wallace?
There should be more than enough balls to go around in Baltimore, because that offense is just absolutely dreadful. So, I mean, I don't see it as a knock on anybody's ability to produce. I think everybody's production could theoretically be higher by just making a better receiving core, right? When you have nothing but a bunch of turds, that you're running out there, nobody's numbers are going to look any good. So I don't necessarily look as a potential detractor in production. Certainly not from Mike Wallace.
Okay. Question: just your thoughts. Who do you think becomes the starting tight end there with Dennis Pitta being released due to his injury? Do you think it's Ben Watson coming back off the Achilles injury from last preseason, or do you think it will be? Let's see, who are the other guys that they've got there? It's Max Williams and Gilmore, I believe, are their 2 other Crockett Gilmore are their 2 other major tight ends there.
I think it's just Watson asterisk based on based on injury, and his ability to come back. I mean, coming back from an Achilles injury is a big deal. I think especially as a tight end, I think that might be a little bit more challenging than certain other positions. But I'm no Dr. James Andrews. But I would have to, it's a bit of a motley crew there at tight end, but I would lean on Watson as being the guy who's the number one.
All right. The Jets released Eric Decker. Could not make a trade work. Again, I tend to find it interesting that when everyone knows that they are going to either release a player or try to find a trade partner, or if they can't find a trade partner, they're going to release him. Why would anyone try to trade for him?
Right. It's the no-brainer of no-brainers. He's going to be free in a week, but you can pay for him now because you want to avoid the mad scramble for his services when he's free in a week.
Yeah.
Because if he could be free in a week, guess what? People would already be coming to you. Look, don't release this dude. We actually like this guy. We'll give you a 6th rounder. People would actually come and offer you stuff.
Yeah.
You don't have to go and solicit this stuff. It would just come to you. See, the way it works is if you have something that somebody else wants, they might come and solicit it from you. But if you have a handful of crap, likely nobody's going to ask.
I think that if Decker can actually get completely healthy, I still think that he can be a solid piece in someone's offense in terms
Arizona or something like that.
In terms of fantasy production, I think he'd be closer to because he was always a solid back end of the wide receiver 1, top wide receiver 2, because he was that consistent Mr. Touchdown. He didn't get multiples in a week, but what was it, a couple seasons ago? He finished with 12 touchdowns?
Right.
And he he never had 2 touchdowns in a game. He had 12 games with a touchdown. I mean, that's the ultimate consistency right there. So I think that if he can get healthy, he still could be a solid person for someone's offense and possibly be that wide receiver 3, maybe a flex role for fantasy purposes. So again, depending on the team he ends up on. Bengals.com's Jeff Hobson hinted the Bengals might hold Giovanni Bernard after his ACL tear out of their first couple of regular season games. Open up the door for Joe Mixon. If Giovanni Bernard is out for those first couple games, I know they want to make sure that he's as healthy as possible, but I don't think Hill's going to have the position to himself for sure. Again, he can't catch the ball out of the backfield. He's proven that multiple times. So I think that leaves the door open for Joe Mixon to possibly take over. Not that, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think Mixon is gonna win that job. If he doesn't win it in the preseason, I say he has it won within the first 4 games, for sure. I think Cincinnati was willing to take the risk on him, given his background at the level that they did in the draft, for a purpose. And from everything I've ever heard, it's never been a question of talent, and that perhaps if there wasn't the unfortunate slugging of a woman incident, then maybe he would have been the first running back drafted in this year's draft over Leonard Fournette. So he's certainly got the ability to do it, to be an every down back in Cincinnati.
All right. Just a quick note, Colts coach Chuck Pagano confirmed Andrew Luck will not do anything during minicamp. I don't see any problem with this. The guy, what was it, a torn labrum, had surgery on it. Protect the investment. Highest paid quarterback in the league. Don't work him until you have to. Like we were talking about with Julio Jones and his ankle last week. Don't do anything with Julio Jones until you have to.
Mm-hmm.
And with Gronk a couple of weeks ago,
mm-hmm.
Light yoga, and then make sure he has a clean jersey for week 1.
Yep.
Sammy Watkins surprisingly was taking reps in team drills after Coach McDermott said he would be limited to start minicamp. Can Sammy Watkins get and stay healthy?
Here's what you're going to see this season, because it's a contract year, and we've seen this from players before. It's the miracle string of healthy games. And Watkins staying on the field and producing and probably being what will look back is a nice sleeper pick and a guy who performed above expectations when all is said and done this year. I mean, I think I have him in that category this year as one of the top potential sleepers, at least at the wide receiver position. So I think given the situation, he's going to stay healthy. If he can't do it this year, his career is over. This is a contract year. This is the only chance he's going to have to make this work. You can't do it in a contract year. You're not getting squat going forward.
Well, I think he'll get paid, not as much. He'll get paid off of what he could possibly do. I think it could be a heavily incentive-laden contract. But I think someone will still pay him because of he has ability to play. Again, it's whether or not he can stay healthy.
Right.
Not surprising, according to ESPN Eagles reporter Tim McManus, Carson Wentz struggled with bouts of inaccuracy during OTAs. It's still only OTAs. You got to remember this guy threw only 6 less passes in his first year as a pro than he did in his entire college career. When he's already, he already had some issues with mechanics. He's working on fixing those up. I'm not too worried about that yet so far. Jets running backs coach Stump Mitchell said at minicamp the team's plan is to use both Bilal Powell and Matt Forte until Matt Forte goes down with an injury. I added that part in. I think Bilal Powell will eventually take over that role. I think that he really is, again, due to his age, I think that he is the better running back for the Jets going forward. Matt Forte can produce, but again, last year his most successful games, I want to say the game that he had, 100 yards and 3 TDs in like week 2 or 3. That was on like 30 carries. He averaged 3 yards a carry to get those 100-plus yards and 3 TDs. All the games where he had the big yardage, it took massive amount of carries and a 3 to 3.5 yards per carry average in order for him to do anything. Bilal Powell was extremely effective down the stretch, but I think that Powell also can be hit with the injury bug and make things a little difficult on him.
Well, Powell's been around here, the Jets for a while now, and if he was ever the guy, Matt Forte wouldn't have gotten there in the first place, right? So there's certainly questions on consistency when it comes to, his ability to be the guy, week in and week out. So, the Jets are full of holes all over the team. I mean, it's just an absolute disaster, the Jets roster.
That's true. All right, here we go. Joe Flacco said that Danny Woodhead brings an element to the Ravens offense they've been missing since Ray Rice. Well, we want I'm guessing that's a good element, not a bad element.
All right.
To the offense. Again, Danny Woodhead is one of those guys that I love drafting because I play PPR leagues. However, again, he's had 2 different seasons in the last 3 years in which he has been knocked out in game 2 with a season-ending injury. 2 years ago, it was a broken leg, and then last year was the ACL. The guy is, I want to say 30, 31 years old. He's had a decent career so far. I'll probably still draft him, and I think his injury last year will bring him down far enough in drafts that he'll still be available for me to pick him up. But I think that we're also talking about, Terrence West will probably be the starting running back with Danny Woodhead catching the ball out of the backfield. And then you've got, Kenneth Dixon, who's on suspension for the first 4 games for, what was it, Adderall? Is that what he got caught with? Something. I don't know. That's usually what it is. It's usually Adderall or something. So he's, with him being out, I really think that Danny Woodhead could, especially in the first few games, have a really good effect on that Baltimore offense.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, Joe Flacco is a check down type of quarterback, at the end of the day. So there's going to be a spot for Woodhead. PPR leagues, obviously, he's of value. He's of extreme value, I think, in, leagues where you have a flex position. And certainly the first 4 games are going to be, kind of the high point, I think, of what you would expect from him, barring injury to the other guys later in the season.
Yeah. I want to say, well, let's also talk about, who was it? Justin Forsett had a big pass catching role with Joe Flacco. What was it, in 2014, I want to say, when he ran for over, was it like 1,100 yards, 1,200 yards? So I think that if Danny Woodhead can be that, just the pass catcher, I think that that'll really help out the Ravens. Let's see. 49ers fifth round tight end George Kittle is getting first team reps at minicamp. They don't really have anyone else. I'm not a believer in Vance McDonald, so let's move. Matt Ryan said that sophomore tight end Austin Hooper has improved exponentially this offseason. If they can manage to get a tight end involved like they used to with Tony Gonzalez, I think that could be really good for Matt Ryan. Hopefully Austin Hooper can be the guy this year, because last year with Shanahan as the offensive coordinator, they were using both Hooper and Toilolo, and who was the other guy that got injured halfway through the season, who was formerly with Denver. I can't remember his name. Anyways, he went on the DL. So I think this is a good thing for Austin Hooper being the lead tight end at this point for Atlanta. Do you think there's enough balls to go around in Atlanta for Austin Hooper?
Yeah, there surely might be, but it might shoot some holes in that whole Julio Jones being used more in the red zone theory. I mean, because where do you use the tight end most, right? You're going to use the tight end most to move the chains on third downs, probably, and in the red zone, more often than not, right? So, once again, I mean, are there going to be enough balls to go around in the red zone?
Doug Martin looks quicker and bulkier this year, per Joe Bucks fan. The muscle hamster with more muscles. I don't think that sounds all that great, to be completely honest. I think he still breaks down and ends up losing the job. I don't think he's going to last long enough.
No, he's got arms like, if at least back in my era, I'm 42 years old. My brother used to have He-Man dolls. And he used to, those biceps on those things were like absolutely absurd. Doug Martin has the same biceps as Merman, running around out there. And I just don't see, how that's going to necessarily help him. I'm not a big Doug Martin fan, but more bulk is not the issue. All
right. Matt Jones' agent has asked the Redskins to release the running back, which would make sense because everyone already knows that he's not in the Redskins' plans when they already have Rob Kelly and then drafted Samaje Perine. Matt Jones will not be a Redskin. They just need to get it over with and let him move on. Let's see. Jordan Howard expects a larger role in the passing game this season. I find that somewhat interesting, considering who else they have to catch passes.
Right, exactly. I think Jordan Howard has done the math on the Bears roster by looking at things and going like, damn, I'm going to have to catch a lot of balls this year. That's basically what he did, because who are you going to throw the ball to? He saw the Victor Cruz signing, and then he made this announcement after that. So apparently that's Jordan Howard's take on the big coup of the Bears signing one Victor Cruz is, I'm going to catch more balls this season. Like 2 weeks later, that's the assessment he makes. I think that's a good man on the street opinion, if you ask me.
Yeah. Denver Post columnist Mark Kisla predicts that Paxton Lynch will be the Broncos' starting quarterback in Week 1. Do you think it really matters who the starting quarterback is for the Broncos?
I think Lynch is definitely going to end up being the guy. He looked great in the preseason last year. He didn't look so hot. He was okay when he got to play last year, but I think he does certainly have the potential. I think ultimately it does matter, because I don't think Simeon has the ability to make that offense what it could be. I think Lynch has a better chance of using the weapons that they have in the passing game than Simeon does. And, to the extent that he is able to do that, that's going to make that defense all the more lethal.
All right. Quick note, although this is defense, Brown doctors have been looking at Myles Garrett's foot after he limped to the sideline following a pass rush drill.
Classic Browns.
Basic luck of the Browns. Yeah, a whole bunch of Browns fans. Not again. Not again. Not again.
It's all over.
Speaking of minicamp, Kirk Cousins vowed to get to target Terrell Pryor heavily on downfield routes this season. That would make sense because, I mean, they could target Jamison Crowder on the downfield routes. However, he's not necessarily. I mean, he's more the get the ball quick into his hands, kind of a Percy Harvin type, in my opinion. Terrell, they lost to Deshaun Jackson, so the most obvious vertical threat's going to be Terrell Pryor.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why they signed him. That's why they brought him in, and I personally think he's going to have a monster year for Washington.
I think so too. He's definitely going to be on many of my draft board watch lists. All right, so that's it for the news and notes. We did actually have. Let me pull up the notifications here. We had a couple of questions here. So real quick before we get into the news and notes, or now that we're done with the news and notes, before we get into the wide receivers, quick question from Kate Grimmett at KGrim37. Is Brandon Cooks a real number one for fantasy purposes? And who has a bigger year, Cooks or a healthy Gronk? I'll let you answer this one first.
That's a good question. I mean, yeah, he's a number one in the truest sense of the word for New England, but there's just so many weapons on New England that I think he can have a huge year. Don't get me wrong, but it's going to be very reliant on what he does best, which is, big plays, deep downfield, passes. He's not a 100 reception guy. I don't think he's a 1,500 yard guy. But I think he can be a 10 touchdown guy. And he can certainly have the numbers. Now, if Gronk is healthy, it's probably a split. I think a healthy Gronk ultimately is the best offensive weapon on that team.
Yeah. Let me see how fast I can actually pull this up. Let's see. Nope. I probably can't pull it up very fast. Never mind. All right, because I was actually gonna look up to see where. Oh, there we go. I may actually have it here. Let's go to players playlist. I've actually got it right here. I want to see who had the bigger year. If it was in terms of fantasy points.
Mm-hmm.
Cooks. Let me see if I can actually find him on here. Cooks. In terms of, so he finished with last year in basic scoring, 206 fantasy points, so 78 receptions, 1,100, almost 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. And then we go to Gronk, who also missed a fair portion of the season. Let's see, 25 receptions, 540 yards, and 3 TDs. Yeah, I think that if Gronk can stay healthy, fantasy-wise, he has the better season because he'll be utilized more in the red zone.
Right.
If he stays healthy, he could be a 14-touchdown guy.
Correct.
Again, it's that can he stay healthy with the beating he takes because he's so highly targeted by Tom Brady. In terms of fantasy purposes, no, I do not think that Brandon Cooks is a wide receiver 1 for fantasy. I think he's a wide receiver 2. There's too much love to spread around in New England in terms of the passing game, and Brady already has a great rapport with Edelman, and Edelman's his number 1 receiver.
Right.
So I think that Brandon Cooks fits in, possibly has more yards, maybe more touchdowns than Edelman, but I still think Edelman's the number 1 there. So I think Brandon Cooks can be a wide receiver 2, maybe a wide receiver 3 in terms of fantasy, probably a wide receiver 2. But I think that's his ceiling. I don't think he hits number 1 status. So, all right, thanks, Katie, for the question. And we had a question. Well, it's not necessarily wide receiver related, but Ernie Holloway asks on Twitter. At Holla the Kid, do you think this is a good year to draft Blake Bortles given the new changes to the offense? I don't necessarily think it's any year's a good year to draft Blake Bortles, to be completely honest. However, I want to say Let me pull it up one more time. I think that Bortles actually finished with more yards or with more fantasy points. Or was it? Did he? Oh, come on, fantasy points. That's what I want. All right, he finished with more fantasy points than both Jameis Winston and Matthew Stafford last year. Wait, that doesn't count. That doesn't count in interceptions. That's different scoring. I think he finished just right around the top 10. So technically a QB1-ish, but it's right on the edge. I don't know. He's such a wild card because he'll have these great games because of garbage time. He's a garbage time quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. He does mount a lot of his numbers, that way. I mean, at the end of the day, right, if you're a fantasy football owner, does it matter? I think from that standpoint, it matters when it comes to consistency and reliability week to week, right? I think he will be better because of Leonard Fournette. I think it takes the pressure off of him. Maybe that's going to help drop your turnovers. I don't know that you necessarily have a hell of a lot more offensive production purely from him. But if you could just improve on some of the dumb plays and the bad play early in games particularly, then I think, Bortles looks good. He's certainly worth being on a roster. I mean, he's certainly a guy who's going to get playing time in fantasy leagues. He's just a guy that you cross your fingers when he's your starter.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think I would be okay taking Bortles as my quarterback 2 in a 2-quarterback league.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, I'm not going to I would have trouble taking him even in a super flex league where you can put in the quarterback as a flex.
Ouch, that's kind of harsh.
Because again, we're talking about consistency.
Right.
It would depend on more players to see, who else I would have. It's a possibility, but I would still be cautious doing that. So
yeah, I think that 8, 9, 10, 11 ranked quarterbacks in the league is a real dogfight.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. All right, moving on. Let's go to it's time for our we're going to go over our wide receiver rankings. Before we do that, again, one more sponsor. Our rankings tonight are brought to you by Vox DFS Firelines. Vox DFS Firelines is one of the industry leaders in consulting and providing DFS lines for just about any sport on any platform. It does not matter if you play MLB, NASCAR, NFL, MLS, or PGA, or whether you prefer Yahoo, DraftKings, or FanDuel. Vox has the lineup experts to help you pull in the cash. Last month, one of their consultants' PGA lines won $65,000 in one night. 60 of that was for finishing second in a single contest. Their guys pulling the money. Their top MLB consultant, Kush, his nickname is the Cash Man. Has multiple. He streaks all the time. Multiple streaks, cashing multiple days in a row, 10 days in a row. The Vox consultants also teach you bankroll management, so you can learn what contests to play, when to play, so that you don't overextend yourself. So again, go to voxdfs.com. That is Vox, VOKSDFS.com today. Tell them that the guys from Skull King Football sent you. If you are on Twitter, you can go to, I believe the Twitter handle is VOKDFS Firelines, I believe is actually their Twitter handle there. So VOKDFS Firelines. Make sure to, when you go over there, let them know that the guys from Skull King sent you there. So, all right, we are moving on to wide receiver rankings. Now, we're just covering standard scoring rankings for the most part. We may later on get into more details with going to PPR, half PPR, all that kind of stuff. But for tonight, really, we just want to focus on standard scoring rankings. So let's go ahead and get into them. Again, we're talking about we do tier based here. So really, for me, I'm sure it's probably the same for you. As far as tier one, really, it's three guys, period. It's Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham Jr., Julio Jones.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's the creme de la creme of receivers, and especially when it comes to consistency as far as what you're going to put out. And I think that's realistically the right ranking, right? I think Antonio Brown has shown year after year that he is the man in Pittsburgh and deserves to be that. Arguably the best player to draft in fantasy if it weren't for David Johnson. I think Odell is there at number 2. I am a little concerned that he gives up some production because of Brandon Marshall. And then you have to have Jones at 3. He can beat either of the other guys potentially in production, but you have to have some discount because of foot issues.
Yeah, multiple foot issues over the last few years. I agree with you. Really, honestly, that's the only reason that I put Odell above Julio Jones is, again, the foot issues. Injuries happen, and sometimes they happen to guys more often than others, and you have to take that into account when you're drafting and when you're looking at people who you want on your fantasy team. All right, so let's go ahead and move. Tier 1 done. Let's move into tier 2. In terms of my list, I don't know if you're looking at mine, Greg. If you're looking at the ones on the website, again, on our website, you can go to skullkingfootball.com/draft-rankings in order to see these rankings. These are my rankings personally, me. These are not ones I've necessarily consulted with with our writers on, but these are my rankings for now. The writers' rankings will be more involved in the draft kits and stuff. But moving on to tier 2, I have Mike Evans, Jordy Nelson, A.J. Green, Dez Bryant, T.Y. Hilton, Michael Thomas, Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, and Doug Baldwin. So that rounds out our top 12, really. I think that really, if there's any question about anyone in this group, there are some questions on whether or not Michael Thomas will have a sophomore slump. But for me, barring injury, I think, and then DeAndre Hopkins, can he have a better rapport with Savage if it remains Savage for very long? And then moving on to Deshaun Watson, once he inevitably takes over, can he keep it going? Can he have a better season than he did with Brock Osweiler? So.
Right. I think when I look at that group, I think I really, generally agree with the names in tier 2. I think Jordy Nelson came back strong last year. The start of the season was a little bit slow, but he really picked it up after that. AJ Green, I've never, he's a great receiver, but I'm just not in love with the lack of production that generally comes from Dalton when it comes to touchdowns. You add John Ross, you add Mixon, like we talked about. What does that ultimately mean for his production? I think DeAndre Hopkins is kind of the question mark in this group, where the question being, what is the rapport once Watson gets in there? Because that's not a question of if, it's when. And if they really do have true rapport, he's a guy who moves his way back up there towards the top of tier 2 because, a couple of years ago, before the Osweiler debacle, he was looked at as a top 3, top 4 receiver, right? So he certainly has the physical attributes and the ability to be there. It's just whether or not you can get a quarterback who can capitalize on those things.
Yeah. One thing to mention on here, that the one game that Brock Osweiler sat out last year, game 14 for them, DeAndre Hopkins had 17 targets in that game.
Right. It was like it was out of this world.
So obviously Tom Savage, if he knows that if you're going to throw to, there's one guy you're going to throw to. And so I think that bodes better for DeAndre Hopkins, considering in so many of these other games, 6 targets, 7 targets, 6 targets, 4 targets from Brock Osweiler. I think that bodes well for DeAndre Hopkins if Tom Savage, stays as the quarterback. I believe that once Watson takes over, it very well could stay with DeAndre Hopkins. I think the top two targets will become DeAndre Hopkins and my man CJ Fedorowicz, who also Tom Savage targeted more than Ryan Griffin, the other tight end. So 7-2 in that game. So those are his top two targets. I think it could stay that way if you look at how Deshaun Watson, when he was playing at Clemson, targeted Mike Williams, and how was it Jordan Leggett was his top tight end there. Those are two of the top guys for him receiving wise. So moving into tier 3, this is where I finally have Brandon Cooks in this kind of tier 3 range. It's kind of it's that beginning of wide receiver 2s. I have Allen Robinson there, Demaryius Thomas, who I may move down. Saw an interesting stat. I want to thank. I'll go ahead and throw the mention out to him. The Eat Sleep Fantasy podcast posted today. They had a graph out that Demaryius Thomas has not outperformed his average draft position since 2013. And right now he is currently in many mock drafts. I want to say his average draft position is wide receiver 15, where I have him ranked right now as far as standard. I could see him dropping down more. Again, we have the question marks with Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch. I could see him moving down a little bit. I don't know who to move above him right now. I'm sure I'll get plenty of questions about that on here. But for right now, I don't necessarily have anyone that I specifically want to move above him. I've got Devontae Adams up there for now. Michael Crabtree, Terrell Pryor, Jarvis Landry. I think Jarvis Landry, even in standard, can be a top 20 wide receiver. Larry Fitzgerald, Brandon Marshall, Julian Edelman, and Golden Tate.
Yeah, and so when I look at this, when I look at tier 3, I think these are some names that ultimately could slide up right by the end of the year. I think the name that jumps out the most is Terrell Pryor, right?
Yeah.
If he were to really live up to, I think, the potential in playing in Washington with a better quarterback with Kirk Cousins, I think he's easily a tier 2 wide receiver when the season is all said and done. I think Brandon Cooks is again that guy that you flip flop, right? It's a coin toss on where he falls, within that group. But at the end of the year, he's not going to put up those Randy Moss numbers, but he might put up better numbers than he did last year, which would put him solidly in the middle of tier 2.
Yeah.
If he were to outperform that, otherwise, Michael Crabtree is certainly somebody that Carr has built a great rapport with. I think that's a bit of a detractor for Amari Cooper in tier 2. I think the thing that helps both of them is that it's obviously a contract year for Carr. Look at being the highest paid quarterback in the league. When that contract is done at about maybe $25 million a year is what I heard.
Yeah.
So that means there's going to be a lot of throwing. A lot of balls going around, a lot of opportunities for these guys. So I would look for both of them to produce well this year. And I agree with you on Demaryius Thomas. I mean, do you really want to take him at that position? He's certainly not going to be a number 1 guy on your team like he was a couple years ago. And he might be a watered down number 2. He's a great value at 3, depending on how the league breaks out. But you're taking tight ends above. You're taking a Gronkowski for sure above Demaryius Thomas, right?
You're probably taking a Jordan Reed and a Travis Kelce above him as well.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So there's these other names that factor in that put his realistic draft position, as a pass catcher, even a little bit further down the list if you want to be safe with who you're drafting.
Yeah. All right. All right, really, how good – because my rankings, I have Brandon Marshall ranked 9 spots higher than pretty much just about anyone else that I've seen. A lot of guys I've seen, Brandon Marshall right around the 30 range. I think that he can be a top 20. I think that by the end of the season, as long as he stays healthy, he will be a top 20 wide receiver.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that he's certainly got the potential to be a top 20 wide receiver. He has the potential to score more touchdowns than certain other guys on this list, Jarvis Landry being one of them.
Correct.
Right. Devontae Adams is going to score fewer touchdowns this year. I don't think he's going to score 12 touchdowns. So there, you can see where there's some wiggle room, for him to move higher. Larry Fitzgerald had a hell of a lot of catches last year. The yardage wasn't any good. Where does he end up ultimately this year? The ageless wonder that he is. He could easily overtake a Larry Fitzgerald potentially. So, yeah, I think Brandon Marshall, should not be much lower than where you have him, especially if I'm looking at some of the names in Tier 4.
Yep. Well, let's go ahead and move on to Tier 4. Keenan Allen, really in here, I've got a lot of injury guys. Let's be honest. Keenan Allen, Dante Moncrief. Then you've got Emmanuel Sanders, Stephon Diggs, who suffered a lot, who dealt with hamstring and leg injuries last year. Alshon Jeffrey, who has dealt with injury, but has also, dealt with PEDs that didn't work. Kelvin Benjamin, who's dealing with weight issues. Jamison Crowder, who honestly is probably a little bit more of a PPR guy, but is very explosive. And with Deshaun Jackson gone again, very well could have a bigger season. Then we've got Deshaun Jackson, who's now in Tampa Bay as the number 2 there. And then at number 32 for me, I've got him ranked a little bit lower for standard, is Tyreek Hill. Tyreek had a huge year last year, but again, I don't think he scores 12 touchdowns like he did last year. A few of those were return touchdowns. He had Maclin as a secondary receiving option there in terms of wide receivers, and then also Travis Kelce. Now he doesn't have Maclin there anymore. Tyreek Hill's been a bit of a controversial player in terms of what is he actually able to do. Can he be that number 1 guy? And it's not very often, let's be honest, that we see for lack of a better comparison, a Percy Harvin type of player become that number 1 guy for very long, if they actually become it, and actually produce at that level.
Right. I mean, he's another one of these fast, get him the ball in space, make things happen, type of players. And just natural flow of the game, sometimes that works better than it does other times, right? You have a lot of these guys in the league, and they don't always find a way to produce. Percy Harvin couldn't consistently produce. Tavon Austin can't consistently produce. I think Tyreek Hill's better than both of those guys, but you can't look at them necessarily to consistently produce. So, what position do you put him in, to your point? And he ultimately, for me, is much more like a wide receiver 4, to be quite honest. I'm a more conservative guy when it comes to drafting. I see other names on here, that you have below, like theoretically a Sammy Watkins, right? Which injury history doesn't make him a safe bet, but contract year overrules that. And would I do contract year Sammy Watkins over what position does he play Tyreek Hill, right? Yeah. Those are the type of things that I'm going to wonder. Looking at a Corey Davis who's even lower. How would I compare them? I'd probably go with the rookie. At that point, especially in maybe a dynasty league where he has the potential to be the guy who's the guy, right? And it's not ever going to be a question. It is, as long as he proves it this year. So I think those are some of the questions you have to ask with him. And at the end of the year, somebody's either going to look like a genius or a fool, depending on exactly where they caught him in the draft.
All right, moving to another player. We're back in this this Tier 4 area. Again, I'm looking at because I'm using the Fantasy Pros app in order to do my rankings, and looking at how down I am compared to all the experts, and how down I know you are compared to all the experts on Alshon Jeffrey. I have him ranked at 28, and it looks like everyone has him ranked right around that wide receiver 15 area.
Good God.
Top of Tier 3 for us. I'm not seeing. He had so much trouble last year. I mean, I know they had the quarterback issues, with all the injuries. But I mean, he's going to a team with Carson Wentz. He's got Jordan Matthews, he does actually have some competition in terms of Jordan Matthews for receiving the ball. Not that's huge, but there's someone else that already has rapport who has proven to play pretty well and be somewhat of a fantasy producer. And you have Alshon Jeffrey, who again was caught taking PEDs last year that didn't help.
Right.
And going to a different team, I don't see it. I mean, I figure he'll finish right around. I could see him finishing at the bottom of a wide receiver 2 12-man league, right in that 24-25 spot. That's honestly, I think that's where he most likely fits.
Yeah, I would think that's kind of a good scenario, realistically for him, because he can't catch the football. I don't know if you've ever actually really looked at him when he's on the field, but when he holds up his hands, these gloves he got, they're weird. I don't know if they just the camera angle or what it was, but his hands always look like the Mickey Mouse, with that big fat white glove that's like disproportionate to like the rest of the arm. The glove did not look right. I'm like, what is that? It's like an inflatable mitt. I'm like, that's why you can't catch the ball. So I think that's ultimately I don't have a lot of high hopes from him. He's not going to run away from people. His yards after the catch aren't that impressive. I think that the guys above him are easily above him, and there could arguably be other guys who end up above him even further. I mean, Deshaun Jackson theoretically might have a better year than Alshon Jeffrey.
Okay. Yeah, it very well could be. But again, with Deshaun Watson, we're also – for me, it's because of his age and some of the leg problems that he's had. Can he stay healthy?
Right. Maybe the warm weather will help.
Yeah. Who knows? That could be. Another guy, we're kind of going backwards on the list. Keenan Allen, I don't know how healthy he can stay. I mean, yes. Let's look at – he's had an ACL tear. He's had a shredded up kidney from getting hit. And I can't remember another one was a shoulder. Those type of injuries – aren't necessarily related, but the fact that he keeps getting injured so severely makes me wonder of whether or not it's just his body can't take the punishment. I'm not willing to take the risk on him. I have him ranked as number 24 in a best case scenario, and will most likely move him down even farther, considering again a lot of the experts have him a lot higher than I do.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, there's a reason Mike Williams was drafted, and Mike Williams has, every bit the potential to usurp that position and own that number one position, playing with a quarterback who really just needs targets to get the ball to. So, I'd have some concerns about Keenan Allen, who's a great talent when he's healthy, but just really weird stuff has been following him around.
Yeah. And then the other, massively injured guy that I wanted to throw out there was Dante Moncrief. Last year he played in 9 games, had 7 touchdowns. And those 2 games that he didn't have a touchdown, he only had like a couple of targets because he was injured in like the first or second quarter. So, I mean, he is a touchdown machine that is trusted in the red zone by Andrew Luck. And if he can stay healthy, could be up in that tier 3 area in my opinion, because if you look at their running game, it's just Frank Gore. They're going to throw the snot out of the ball again because it's Andrew Luck.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
I just don't think he can stay healthy.
Right. Well, that's the question. I mean, just a injury bug all across, Indy's team, frankly. But Moncrief did show himself to be highly productive when he is in there. I think, Indy's going to look better this year. Eric Decker is a guy who would look pretty darn good in a Colts uniform, right? I mean, places where that guy could fit, where he'd have, a lot of upside potential. I would think that Indianapolis is one of those places. Arizona's another one of those places. And if they were to sign somebody like him, then I think that ultimately kind of plays a role. And obviously, where do these things shake out at the end of the year?
Yep. All right, and then let's go ahead and go kind of this last little section here. I think there's something wrong with the coding when I input this, because it's got massive tiers kind of cut into all the rest of my tiers here.
Right.
Let's go with let's start at with that new tier 3 where it's got Willie Snead. Start there. Willie Snead, I think, could be a top 20 wide receiver this year. I really am probably going to be moving him up even farther than this 33 section, because you've got Michael Thomas, and you've got the Colby Fleener, who didn't really show a whole lot this year, but who knows, could have a better year after actually having a year in the system. And then you've got the absence of Brandon Cooks. I think that only poses huge gains for Willie Snead. And in terms of draft value, because of how high Michael Thomas is going, again, right around that wide receiver 10 area, I think that Willie Snead's value is going to be a whole lot better. I know a whole lot of people are saying this, but obviously Willie Snead's value is going to be better because he is going to get so many more targets than he did last year, because there's going to be more to go around with Cooks gone.
Yeah, absolutely. Willie Snead has the potential to end up as a solid number 2 wide receiver by the end of the year, assuming Drew Brees is able to kind of maintain that level of production throughout the year. I mean, that's really what New Orleans comes down to. It's not, which names are at wide receiver, is can Drew Brees produce?
Yep.
Keep doing what he's doing. And when we talked about the quarterback episode, I said, he's still a great quarterback, but I would slot him down for the first time this year versus last year. I saw a thing from Peter King. I don't know. Obviously, Peter King's been around football forever. He knows more about football than, he's forgotten more than I'll ever know. I don't know that he's a fantasy football guru, though. And but even he said, maybe Breeze is one more year. This is probably not the year that he's still at that top level. So could that be a negative impact on what people might expect out of these guys? But I think Willie Snead ultimately does get ranked higher. And on a relative value versus where somebody drafts Michael Thomas at the end of the year, he's a better relative value.
Yeah. All right. We've got the ever-injured Sammy Watkins. I've got Rashard Matthews. I still think I have tentatively right now, I have Rashard Matthews over Corey Davis. That will change. Really, that's just because Corey Davis is a rookie. He was coming off an ankle injury. I want to see what he can do in mini camps and see what he can do in a preseason game. So for right now, that's really why I still have Rashard Matthews above him. And then we've got some wild cards here. We've got Devontae Parker, Tyrell Williams, who showed a lot last year. I'm apparently a lot higher on Tyrell Williams than anyone else because I've got him 11 slots higher than most of the experts at number 38 instead of, almost 50. The guy produced, especially if Keenan Allen goes down again, Tyrell Williams will have another 1,000-yard season this year.
Yeah, especially if Keenan Allen goes down. And I think if he's ranked lower, it's because somebody's assuming that he's going to produce, a lot, right? That Keenan Allen's going to come back and kind of put up all those numbers that otherwise Williams was able to capitalize on last year. But, I think there is certainly enough to go around, when it comes to the Chargers. He's a solid receiver, but yeah, these are the guys that you get into, in this range where you got injury guys, you got rookie guys, you got Martavis Bryant, the drug guy, then you get some Bears guys, so you're getting into that area where it just starts getting, a little bit murky, right?
Yeah. I think for the most part, then you've got some Jets guys as well. I think that once you get down to here, it's somewhat of a crapshoot. You will need to see more in preseason. Again, this is why we don't draft until the last possible moment. It stinks a little bit that the Scott Fishbowl that I'm in, the draft is, I want to say it's mid-July. It's like July 10th or something like that. Or that's when it starts, but you've got like 3 hours between every pick because, you've got guys all over the country doing the picking. So, yeah, I think once we're in this area, a couple guys that I'm higher on than obviously most of the experts. I'm high on Zay Jones as long as he stays healthy. I think he performs well, and he's in a spot that with Sammy Watkins, who can't seem to stay healthy, Zay Jones could be the number 1 wide receiver in Buffalo. Who else do I have in this area that I'm kind of high on? Sterling Shepard. even with bringing in Brandon Marshall and Evan Ingram, in terms of tight ends, rookie tight ends don't perform all that great. I mean, you see guys that, guys may have more than 6 touchdowns, but it's very few of them that get over 500-600 yards.
Right.
And Sterling Shepard, I want to say, what did he finish with? 8 touchdowns last year and a little over 600 yards. I think he can improve on that. Again, if Brandon Marshall has some health issues, can't stay healthy, Sterling Shepard very well could, step right back into that number 2 role. I think that he has, with that year with Eli Manning, has enough of a rapport with him and has enough of Eli Manning's trust, again, to still be used down in the red zone. All right. Is there anyone, I don't know, maybe someone that you think that we haven't mentioned yet that you think will be better than people think? It's kind of one maybe sleeper guy that you think everyone seems to be overlooking so far.
I think as I'm going through the list here and looking for people who could have some decent numbers, Curtis Samuel. I really like what him and McCaffrey ultimately bring to the potential of the Panthers this year. He's kind of, maybe if I'm looking at it, like, would he be the poor man's Tyreek Hill to assess the start of the season, right? As far as what are you really going to get from him? But I think that's somebody that can obviously, obviously has the potential to produce, and within an offense, maybe overproduce where he's likely to probably not even be drafted in most fantasy leagues this year. I think John Ross is, another one that could have, that wide receiver 4 potential.
Big as bust type of guy.
Right, exactly. So not consistency week to week, but at the end of the season, put up some pretty decent numbers. In the rare event that Kevin White has a functioning leg, then he obviously probably has massive upside, regardless of if he's playing with, Beaker or Trubisky, the golden child, because the only other options they have are Cameron Meredith and, Jordan Howard. So, I'm sorry, Victor Cruz. I don't want to overlook that key signing. But Kevin White has the ability to be the number 1, theoretically, right? That's why they drafted him. He should be the number 1 wide receiver on the Bears. So let's pretend that he becomes the number 1 wide receiver on the Bears. That's a lot higher than most people are going to draft him this year.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know how I messed this up. One guy that I definitely think is going to be a lot higher is Cole Beasley. Somehow I have him down at wide receiver number 74. He will be a top 40 wide receiver because Dak Prescott trusts him and loves throwing to him in the slot, period. You look at how much he threw to him last year. Cole Beasley had a kind of a breakout year of sorts, I guess you could say, where halfway through the season he was outperforming guys that were, again, we look at the top of this, he was outperforming Allen Robinson. He was practically outperforming Demaryius Thomas, Jarvis Landry. These were guys that he was outperforming last year halfway through the season. So I think, he's definitely a guy I will be moving up into the top 40 or 50. So. All right. Well, if there's nothing else from you, Greg, I think we'll call it a show.
Yeah, I think we got through, the list here, and obviously we'll see how things develop through camp and, slide some things around, but ultimately good show, good info. Fantasy owners are richer for the experience, as they always are when they tune in. And those who don't tune in, I have removed from my list of successful people.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank everyone who followed us on the broadcast tonight, not only on Facebook, but also on Twitter. We had a bunch of views on Twitter as well. Again, thank you everyone for being part of the show tonight. Thank you for the questions. We will be doing this again next week. And I believe next week our topic will be the tight ends and going over the tight end rankings. We'll see if we can maybe get our tight end writer Dante on the show next week. It'll be a little bit tough since we start this at midnight his time. So we'll see if we can get him on the show next week, and hopefully Justin will be back as well. So, all right, thank you again, everyone, for taking your time to listen to the Skull King Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullrood, and for Greg, again, thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Hey, Skull King Nation, thank you for listening to the Skull King Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.